Salamatu. Salamatu was a 17-year-old genius from a small interior village somewhere in Kaduna. She was the daughter of a farmer and a seamstress, and most of her family and members of her village were uneducated. In fact, Salamatu was the first person in her family to actually pursue an education. Her parents even worked night and day just to ensure that she finished her secondary school education. It wasn't easy for them at all. But because she was so brilliant, they wanted to give her a good chance at life. At 17, Salamatu was ready to start university. She got a scholarship to attend a private university in Abuja. Her parents saw this as a miracle because there was no way they could afford to send her to university. Also, they were proud to know that someone from their small village would represent them out there, making a difference. Salamatu packed the little she had and embarked on her journey to Abuja. She bid farewell to her parents and her 8 siblings, cradling her books in one hand and a Ghana must-go bag in the other. She had never been anywhere outside her small village before. In fact, she didn't know what to expect in Abuja. Still, she was excited and saw it as an opportunity to be something big one day. Salamatu was now in Abuja. When she found her way to her hostel, she said goodbye to her escort. She then packed her little belongings into the room. There were 3 other girls there. They welcomed her in and helped her settle down. The 4 girls spent some time talking and getting to know Salamatu. Even though she was shy and reclusive, she enjoyed the company of the girls and was glad she had already made some friends. After spending hours talking about life in Abuja, it was already night time, and Salamatu and the girls prepared for sleep as lectures resumed the very next day. As Salamatu slept, she had no idea that she would not make it to lectures the next day. Calamity and chaos would greet them in the early hours of the morning. At 3 a.m. in the morning, Salamatu was awakened by terrifying screams. When she opened her eyes, it was pitch black in the room. The other girls had also been awakened. "Did you guys hear that?" one of the girls asked in fright. Immediately, another scream was heard along with the voices of some men. The hair on Salamatu's body stood sharply and a quiver ran down her spine. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but they knew that there was danger around them. The girls quickly huddled together, too afraid to go outside or peep through the window to see what was happening. Suddenly, a loud and thunderous gunshot erupted. Salamatu just sat, shaking in the corner, pressing her head against her knees. Another girl was trying helplessly to call the police on her phone. One of the girls started to cry and scream. "Oh God, we need to get out of here." "No, wait, let's stay here. It might be too dangerous outside," another one spoke up. "No, if we stay here, they will come here and kill us. I don't want to die." With that, the girl ran frantically to the door, opened it wide and rushed out as quickly as possible. She didn't make it very far. One of the men outside, seeing her flee, chased her down and brought her back, arms bound. With the door wide open, at least 5 men with heavy guns and blackened faces walked into their room. The light from the pole outside was able to illuminate the room, giving form to the people inside. Salamatu looked up and saw that 2 of the men pointed guns at them as the other 3 tied the screaming girls up. All of the girls were led by these men outside the room. It was then that Salamatu realized that the entire hostel had been raided by nothing less than 30 of these men, as girls were being led out of each room, bound just like they were. There were 5 grey buses parked by the hostel. All the girls were thrown into those buses, many of them crying and screaming. A sleeping Salamatu was again awakened by a loud noise. Soon she realized that one of the men had slapped her on her back. She opened her eyes to see that they had been transported to a small building in a forest-like place, a remote location that could not be traced. As the man slapped her, she could hear him telling her to stand up. She wasn't sure exactly when or how she fell asleep. She must have passed out from the harsh abduction and the intense fear she felt. The men quickly lined her up along with other girls who were quivering and shaking from fear. As the girls stood in line, 3 men walked back and forth examining them. After this process, the men started selecting girls one by one. 8 girls were selected and Salamatu was one of them. What were they doing? What exactly did they want? Salamatu thought. She was too frightened to ask. When they finished the selection process, the girls were then moved to a different room. It was an open space, no furniture, just mats on the floor. The door was locked behind them. The windows were barred. There was no escape. The girls cried out, weeping, not knowing what would happen next. After 10 minutes, they heard the doors being unlocked, and then they were pushed open. A total of 8 men who looked like prominent rich men walked into the room. 2 gunmen followed behind. In that moment, the girls understood what was about to happen, and they cried even more. Each of the 8 men walked around the girls, each man grabbing the one he preferred. When one of the men approached Salamatu, she knelt down and begged him, pleading seriously for him not to harm her. The man leaned forward and whispered in Salamatu's ear, "You are mine." With that, he pushed her on one of the mats. Salamatu, already weak, tried her best to struggle, but he was just too strong. It was a horrible thing that day, as the screams erupted loudly from that room. They were all raped. It was now 3 p.m. Once again, Salamatu was knocked out. She started to awaken again, this time with terrible aches and pains around her body. She didn't remember exactly when she passed out. The last memory she had was of the man who raped her. She saw his ugly face, heard his grunting, and felt his strong hands on her body. She was too weak to stand up, but she realized that she was now in a different room again. When she opened her eyes, she saw the men carrying the body of another girl out of the room. When she looked carefully, she saw that it was one of her hostel mates. She was one of the 8 girls selected, one of the girls who was raped. She didn't make it. She passed away from the trauma of the rape. Salamatu wished it was her. Death was better than this, she thought. Salamatu laid still. She still couldn't move. It was like she was paralyzed. She looked up at the ceiling and remembered her mother's face. If her mother knew what was happening to her, she would have a heart attack. As she laid there, she felt a hand touch her. She turned her head to see that it was another girl. She didn't recognize her. The girl looked like she was around her age or maybe older. She didn't look terrified or scared like the other girls. Something was different about her. The girl smiled softly at Salamatu. She said, "My name is Aisha. What is your name?" Salamatu looked at her and tried to answer, but found that she just could not speak. The shock from the experience seemed to have taken her voice away. When she opened her mouth, all she could do was crumble and cry. Aisha quickly put her arms around her, stroking her hair and telling her that everything would be okay. It was comforting to have someone there in that moment. But who exactly was Aisha? After a few days, Salamatu had gained some strength and could now stand up. However, she still could not speak. Aisha would come to her aid, bringing food and water and clothing. The 2 of them sat outside. Some gunmen guarded the area so no girl could escape. Aisha spoke to Salamatu in whispers. "How are you feeling? Can you talk now?" Salamatu just put her head down, shook her head and looked away. Aisha then thought of something. She grabbed a pen and paper from her pocket, passed it to Salamatu and told her to write. "What is your name?" Aisha asked her. Salamatu penned down her name on the paper. Aisha had a smile on her face. She had finally figured out a way to communicate with her. After that time, the 2 became friendly with one another, communicating only by written text. Aisha was also abducted from another school 2 years before. She too had been raped beaten and assaulted. One day, Aisha scribbled on a piece of paper and passed it to Salamatu. "Do you pray to God?" the note read. Salamatu quickly scribbled back, "I no longer believe in God." Aisha responded, writing carefully, "You don't know the God I am talking about." When Salamatu read what she wrote, she had a confused look on her face. What did Aisha mean? Aisha was abducted as a Christian. She never renounced her faith, despite the constant abuse she passed through. Instead, she ministered to girls who were held in captivity. All of this she did discreetly, knowing that if she was ever caught, she would be put to death. Yet, it never stopped her from preaching the gospel. She was never afraid. As a matter of fact, she saw it as an honor to die for Christ. Her abductors had held her captive because she would not renounce her faith. Most girls who got abducted would be released after negotiations with the government. Others died from trauma, and a few were sold off into slavery. Yet, Aisha remained. She would pray to God whenever new girls were abducted, knowing that she couldn't minister to all of them at the same time. She had to do it one person at a time. So she would ask God to lead her to someone. This time around, the Lord led her to Salamatu. Aisha reached into her pocket, pulled out a piece of paper and folded it into Salamatu's hand. "Don't let them see it," she said. In that moment, one of the guards came rushing towards them. "You, stand up," he said, pointing to Salamatu. "Follow me." She was terrified. She screamed for Aisha, who held her hand as long as she could and told her to be strong. The man pulled a struggling Salamatu into that same room from the other night, only that it was just her in the room this time. The guard who brought her in started to undo his trousers, licking his lips as he did so. He pushed her to the ground. Amidst her crying, he raped her. She cried and cried and cried. After he was done, he just left her there, sobbing alone. She lay there in the dim-lighted room, the atmosphere quiet. Then, in that stillness, she remembered that Aisha gave her something, the paper. She didn't know why that came to her mind in that awful moment, but she ceased her crying and wiped her tears. She reached into her pockets and pulled out the paper. It was a handwritten note in Aisha's handwriting. She read it, and it wrote, "Freedom is found when you believe in Jesus Christ. This is his promise to you." Then Jesus said to those Jews who believed him, "If you abide in my word, you are disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." They answered him, "We are Abraham's descendants, and have never been in bondage to anyone. How can you say you will be made free?" Jesus answered them, "Most assuredly, I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave of sin, and the slave does not abide in the house forever, but a son abides forever. Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed." John 8:31-36. She closed her eyes and meditated over the word free, and that was all she thought about as she laid on the floor, holding tightly to that piece of paper. She lay there. She eventually fell asleep. While she slept, she had a dream. In that dream, she saw Jesus. There were heavy chains around her hand. The chains immobilized her. Jesus came near to her. He opened his mouth and called her name, "Salamatu, be free." Immediately he said those words. The chains fell to the ground and she was free. After that, Jesus opened a door, walking through the door in front of her. He reached out his hand and beckoned her to follow him through the door. And just like that, Salamatu passed through the door and she was free. She opened her eyes and she knew the ticket to her freedom was this Jesus. She didn't know how. She didn't know when. But she knew he was the only way she would leave this place. What will become of Salamatu and Aisha? Is there any real hope for them? Stay connected and find out on our next episode.